Most property investors avoid ground floor units because they feel like it will be harder to sell in the future. That is the common belief. But here's the twist. What if I told you that there are cases where ground floor units actually made more profit than the higher floor ones? So in this video, I'll share why investors usually avoid ground floor units, the mindset behind those decisions, and why it could be a mistake. And if you are an investor who thinks higher floors always means higher returns, this might change the way you look at property.
Short property stories from real conversations.
By the way, I'm Gaynor, and I've met hundreds of property upgraders and investors, and these are their real stories. So if you want to avoid costly mistakes and make better decisions, do check them out, and the links are just below. Recently, I shared a story on why I would recommend ground floor units to property buyers, and that post blew up with over 300,000 views. But what was interesting in the story was the comments. Almost 80 to 90% of the comments said that they would avoid ground floor units at all costs. And the reasons given was, there's no privacy, lots of pests coming into the house, noise pollution, fogging with smoke coming into the house. And to be fair, those are valid concerns. But as I read through these comments, I realized something critical. Most people were judging from their own lifestyle preference, imagining themselves living in a unit, not from an investment perspective. And that's where things get interesting. Because even when I showed case studies where ground floor units perform better, many still couldn't accept it. Take Gem Residences for example. In August 2017, a buyer picked up a 37th-floor 3-bedroom for about 1.46 million. A few months later, another buyer bought the exact same size on the ground floor for about 1.22 million. Years later, when both were sold, the higher floor unit made 527,000 profit, while the ground floor unit, it made $560,000 profit. So the buyer who went for the cheaper ground floor unit actually made more profit with lesser capital outlay. And there's another project with a similar case study. At the Clement Canopy, a buyer bought a 4-bedroom ground floor unit at 1.61 million. One day later, another buyer bought the same size unit on the 22nd floor for 1.69 million. When both were sold, the higher floor unit earned $906,000, while the ground floor unit made $891,000 profit. The difference in profit was just $15,000. So it's obvious that in some situations, ground floor units can actually outperform higher floor units. But here's the thing. Even after showing these case studies where ground floor units clearly outperform high floor units, many investors still said no. Why? Because the decision wasn't about the numbers anymore. It was about the mindset. The comments revealed something deeper. Most people weren't looking at it as an investment. They were imagining themselves living in it, and that's where preference takes over logic. That's why you see reasons like no privacy, lots of pests, too noisy, fogging, and no view. And honestly, all of those are valid concerns if you are buying to stay. But here's the critical difference. For investment, the question is not, would I like to live there? The real question is, who will buy this from me in the future? And here's why I sometimes recommend ground floor units in the first place. Because they are usually priced lower than higher floors. Take Gem Residences for example. The ground floor unit was about $240,000 cheaper than the 37th floor unit. That difference in entry price already gives the buyer a great start. Because when it comes to investment, profits are made at the point of entry and at the point of exit. So getting in cheaper simply gives you a head start. But remember, an investment only pays off when someone else is willing to buy from you. And true enough, not all the comments in my post were actually negative. In fact, some reviewed that they genuinely love ground floor units. They talk about the bigger patio space, the easy access, and how much better it was for families with kids or pets. And these are the exact buyers who will form your demand in the future. They may not be the majority, but they exist. And here is something most people often overlook. Ground floor units themselves don't make up the majority of the resale market either. In fact, in each block, you usually only get a handful of ground floor units across different layouts. So in a way, they are actually quite rare. Which means when a family or buyer does want a ground floor, there are only limited options available in that development. That demand-supply balance is what gives you the edge. And that's why sometimes the units most people avoid can turn out to be the smarter investment. At the end of the day, it's not about high floor or ground floor. It's about buying with intention, not purely on emotion. That's it for today's video. Gaynor from Property Made Simple. If you like this story, remember to like, share and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video.